Sometimes the best stories in golf aren't found on tour. You'll find them at the back of the range. And here's your host, Ben Adelberg.
Welcome to the Back of the Range Golf Podcast. This is Ben Adelberg, your host, and this is episode 125. Hope everyone's week is going as best as possible. Looks like some movement with the stimulus package and stock market's up today. Of course, that could all change. I have no intellect with the market whatsoever, so we're just going to change course right now. Remember, posting on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The handle is the Back of the Range Podcast. Trying to get rid of some towels, trying to do some giveaways, just trying to interact. Let me know what you guys think of the episodes this week. We are going to do an episode each and every day this week. Just got a couple more to close the week out. Not sure what we're doing about next week. We'll see. But our guest on this episode is Brad Faxon. Oh, where do you start? 1983 U.S. Walker Cup team. Yeah, Jay Sigel is his captain. Jay was a previous guest here at the Back of the Range. Played professionally on the PGA Tour. Won numerous events. Won on the Champions Tour. Played on 2 Ryder Cup teams. We talked about that. He does TV work for Fox. And there are players coming to him all the time asking for help on their putting. And why wouldn't you? One of the best putters of all time. He's working with Rory McIlroy, working with Gary Woodland, Brandon Grace. So Fax is into a lot of things. And we had a great conversation. Went about 90 minutes. So lots of fun, lots of great stories. And there's a story at the end of this episode that is absolutely epic. I mean, it has to do with Arnold Palmer. So you know it's going to be awesome. Let me know again what you think about the episodes. Do you have any suggestions? Man, I'm open to just about anything. We're going to keep doing some college episodes. I know they had their season ended, but there's some great stories out there with some players and coaches. I am going to finish up the Road to Augusta series. You know, we had Abel Gallegos on. The rest of the amateurs, they are coming as well. So lots of great stuff coming. We're going to get through this together. So let's get to this episode right now. Brad Faxon, welcome to the Back of the Range. How are you?
I'm doing well. Like we said, Ben, it's trying to figure out things to do in this environment. I mean, we use the word unprecedented too much because there's no other word to describe what we're all going through and trying to make the best of times with the virus kind of sneaking into the country and now wiping out almost half the stock market, it looks like.
All right. This is a Friday afternoon. I'm letting listeners know when we record just because of how quickly things change. So it's Friday. It's March 20th, and let's not depress the listeners or myself by talking about the stock market.
Yeah, forget it.
Yeah. Let's go to a happier direction. But I appreciate you doing this. And yeah, I mean, what are you trying to do to keep sane? I mean, are you venturing out to? I mean, are you walking 9 holes? What do you do to stay sane?
Well, that's a good question. We got home Monday from a 2-week trip in New Zealand. We had planned, as you would expect, months and months ago with some good friends that live in Santa Monica. And we were there as tourists exploring, bungee jumping, doing some rides over some mountains, some trails. We helicoptered. We ate good food and drank some New Zealand wine, and then we played some golf. And one of the places we played was a new course called Tahiti that Tom Doak designed. A developer named Rick Kane, an American from Los Angeles, built this place, started about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's sensational. So we were avoiding all the news in the U.S. about the virus and the scares, but we were also nervous when President Trump made this announcement that he wasn't going to let Europeans fly into the country. And here we are in New Zealand, halfway around the world, like, do we need to get back? And thankfully, it was only a couple of days later, and we got back on Monday through Los Angeles. And it was the first time in my life, and, probably as flown as most people have ever flown, and saw 2 airports, LAX and Fort Lauderdale, that were virtual ghost towns.
Unreal. Yeah, I don't think I could ever imagine seeing Fort Lauderdale Airport empty. And that can't, there's a point where you're like, wow, airport isn't too crowded. This is great. And then there's that other point where you're like, okay, this isn't good. This airport is way too quiet. Well, I'm glad you got back safe. And yeah, I saw a video of you bungee jumping, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but when I think of PGA Tour players that would be bungee jumping, I'm thinking of like a Ricky Fowler. I'm thinking of a Brooks Koepka. Brad Faxon is not the name that really comes to the top of the list. How did that happen? Did you too much New Zealand wine, or was it a bet? How'd that happen?
Oh, wait a minute. Should I be insulted by that question, Ben?
I mean, you can be. I mean, I hope not, but I'm just letting you know. When I think of daredevil PGA Tour players, I'm just being honest. Brad Faxon is not at the top of the list.
Okay, well, let's see. I don't know if I have a crutch for speed. I like to drive fast.
Okay.
I don't mind roller coasters. I'm not afraid of heights. I'm not claustrophobic. But jumping 150 feet, that's not something I had high on a bucket list. I have a good friend of mine that went over with his family a few years ago and did 2 different bungee jumps, one in Zimbabwe, I think, or Tanzania, and one, the one I went to in just outside of Queenstown. And I said, okay, if he could do it, I could do it. He's kind of my age, and he has 4 daughters. I have 4 daughters. And then the couple that we were going with, she had done it. My buddy's wife had done it the last time they were over there, and she was encouraging me to do it. And then 3 guys that I knew who took their wives over a couple years ago that are all older than me. They're all golf nuts. They're all members of a famous club where they have a famous tournament in April, and they all jumped. Now, they might have been Chardonnay induced, but I had a buddy of mine with me that we played golf in the morning at a great place called Jack's Point. Went over to meet our wives at the place. I did do 1 shot of tequila, but not enough to worry about anything. And watched a line of people, get suited up to go, and then they have a picture on the desk when you're there getting your weight and paying of a woman that was 91 years old, and she bungeed.
Oh, so that's just flipping you off. That's just like, yeah, you got to do it if you see that picture.
I know. So and she had a big smile on her face as she's standing on the ledge. But when they're wrapping this thing around you and you got this harness around kind of your waist and your crotch area, you feel pretty secure, knowing that there's going to be, I had never been a skydiver. I'd never jumped out of an airplane. I don't know if I'd do that, but this would make me think that I could do this again. You're free falling for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, 140 feet, and then I guess the most fun part about it is the rebound, the recoil. When you get down and your fingers are inches away from the water, and you go zipping back up, the elasticity of the bungee pulls you back up maybe 2/3 of the way, and now you're totally out of control. You don't know which end is up or which end is down, and you're swinging around in this rope. Kind of felt like Tarzan.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of videos of that, and I'm glad you did it. Glad you're safe. But yeah, I don't know if that's not up my speed, but glad you did that. And we're gonna tackle a lot of topics that maybe after we get done telling some stories, we'll say, well, that is something that Brad Faxon would do. So we'll have to see. What I want to ask about, obviously multiple time PGA Tour winner, multiple Ryder Cup appearances. And we'll get into that, but I want to ask you, just before we get off this topic of coronavirus, the thing I want to ask you is that, there's a lot of people that are, we see celebrities and we see athletes from different sports that are unfortunately getting this thing. It looks like it's inevitable for a lot of people in the country. And at some point, I know there was a PGA Tour Latin America player that did contract coronavirus, and it seems at some point, I'd love to be proven wrong, but it seems at some point that we're going to see a high-profile player on the PGA Tour that is going to contract coronavirus. And I'm just wondering, how should, in your eyes, how should we proceed with this as far as whether it's perception on social media or announcements in the mainstream media? How do we move forward once we see someone that is on the PGA Tour? How should they communicate the coronavirus to their following, to their fans, to golf fans worldwide?
It seems like there's already a bunch of athletes, and namely a bunch of NBA players that have gotten the virus, and they come public with it. All the data that is out there, if it's reliable, some of it is, some of it isn't. It seems like it says 60% of the U.S. population is going to get the virus.
Yeah.
For somebody's going to get it that's a PGA Tour player. It might be a big name player. You can be as careful as you want to be, I think, in this situation and still get it. You can be unlucky and get this virus. Look at Tom Hanks. He was down in Australia with his wife when he got it. And he posted some pretty cool videos about what it was like going through it. I know there's a couple strains of this virus. I know that you can sometimes have the virus but don't show any signs or symptoms for a while. So I still think there's a long way to get out of this hole. But I think that also this summer, as the summer approaches and the weather gets better, the virus doesn't thrive in hot weather as well as it does in the cold weather. And most of the virus now is in the colder climates. And hopefully we figure out a way to keep everybody inside. I think these next couple of weeks are crucial.
Definitely. A lot of what people are doing right now, if they do get out on the golf course, they're not using golf carts. They're carrying their bag, or there's different things, not touching the flag, not going in a clubhouse. But I thought of this question. What's the most memorable round of golf that you've ever played carrying your bag?
Ooh, that's a good question. Most memorable carrying my bag. Well, when I was young, I played a lot carrying my own bag and practicing with 3 different balls. And on my own course, whether it was Rhode Island Country Club, back in Rhode Island as a kid, and certainly we played in college carrying your own bag, all your amateur golf.
Yeah.
Playing. So down here in Florida, that's almost unheard of.
I know.
Carrying your own bag. The place where I live, a nice community called Old Palm Golf Club, everybody has their own cart.
Right.
And the rule now is if you're going to play, and I played yesterday with my wife and another couple, is you can play with your cart. You can't share a cart with anyone unless it's family. So I'm like, okay, I can handle that. And we had a great time, actually, out there. You stay, cautious, far away. Flag sticks are in. We had our club started a little trend down here that a couple clubs did, where they pulled the cup, an inch out of the hole, so you could putt at this, at the liner.
Right.
Which really, to me, wasn't golf. It was like you could smack it as hard as you want, and the temporary rule was, hey, if it hits any part of the liner, it counts. I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's not a skill. You can just swing as hard as you want.
Yeah.
And then Gil Hance has a architect partner, Jim Wagner. And Wagner said he heard of a cool workaround that they found that if you get one of those noodles for a swimming pool, those long styrofoam things, and they have a hole in the middle of them, you can cut maybe a 3 or 4 inch deep piece, wrap it around the bottom of the flagstick, so the ball will actually go into the hole, but only half the ball goes into, falls.
Right.
So you can pick it out with 2 fingers without touching the flagstick. And today was the first day we did it at my club at Old Palm, and the players all thought it was better, especially the better players that are playing, want to go play a match or maybe turn in a score. So I saw that Winged Foot, they have a similar styrofoam piece that goes into the hole and allows players to actually putt. So I was pretty excited to hear that. It seems like it's one of the few safe places where you can kind of congregate, not get too close, and not spread the virus around. And, in the wake of all these cities and states closing restaurants, hotels, the clubhouses, even Seminole closed down today, and they're only allowing walking. So I'm not a member at Seminole, and I'm sure that would be a place where I'd go. And I know my producer at Fox, Mark Loomis, and his son are going over there today. They're carrying bags, and talk about something pretty good.
That's not a bad place to get an evening 9 in. That's not too bad. So,
no, that would be nice. If you were down here, we could go do that.
I'll be right up. We got to see if they'll let us in. But probably, you'd have better luck than I would. But we a lot of what we talk about here at Back of the Range is a lot about amateur golf, a lot about college golf. And, in '83, you played Walker Cup at Royal Liverpool. I was just there last year for the latest edition of the Walker Cup. and you played your golf at Furman and had this phenomenal collegiate career. When did it become evident that that was going to be in your future, playing on that team in '83?
So I was a late bloomer as a golfer. Growing up in Rhode Island, I never skyrocketed. I just kind of got steadily improved. I didn't get a big scholarship to play college golf until after I had committed to go to Furman, where I ended up graduating from, and very happy that I went there. I got to play on the team right away. I might not have if I went to a good school. And when I got to Furman, then there were a few players that had been there before me that had made one of the All-American teams. They were first, second, third, and honorable mention teams, and they had these sort of wooden plaques up on the wall for a guy named David Strawn or Kenny Zell. And I remember seeing those, and I studied the years of these players, and it seemed to me that if there were players that were on the first or second team All-Americans, they all made it to the PGA Tour. They all had good amateur careers outside of college, where they might have played in a U.S. amateur or played well in the bigger tournaments and had a chance to make Walker Cup. So in 1982, I made first team All-American my junior year at Furman. I got my name on one of those plaques where I'm like, this is what I wanted to be. And, I got ranked in college. They didn't do it anywhere near as detailed as now. But my senior year, I had a great senior year in college, won the Haskins Award, which was, that kind of was the college equivalent in golf for the Heisman.
Right.
I'm actually looking at the trophy right now. So that was kind of neat, and that helped for me to make that Walker Cup team, and the first time for me to play in the UK, play links golf, and to represent my country.
And when you play this, you play on this team, and like right now, pretty much, at least it's been this way for quite some time, probably the last 10 to 20 years. There'll be a mid-am there, as whether it's a Stuart Hagestad or it's a Trip Keeney or a Mike McCoy, but it's mainly college kids that are destined to at least make a run at playing on the PGA Tour. But back in '83, you still had a collection of these mid-ams, and some pretty big names. You got Holtgreave and Lewis, and then obviously Jay Sigel, who is, he is the all-time winningest Walker Cupper on the U.S. side, and I think he played 15 or 17 straight years of Walker Cups. He was your playing captain. What was it like being that young, and just you got these grown men on this team?
I know, it was very different now, Ben, because for Fox, we covered the Walker Cup at LACC.
LACC.
17 2 years ago. Yeah. And Stuart Hagestad was the old man at 27, I think he was. And we had, I think on my team, 3 or 4 guys over 40.
Yeah.
So it's really, really different. And, we had a couple college kids from University of Houston on the team. Dave Tentis, Rick Fair was on the team, Willie Wood, Nathaniel Crosby, who's back-to-back captain now. So I'll tell you what, it was one of the most fun things I've ever had in my life. Playing amateur golf was awesome. Playing over there in Scotland and England and links golf, Liverpool, of course, that really wasn't a heralded golf course. They had before that the '67 U.S. Open. DiVincenzo won. So not many Americans knew Royal Liverpool, or Hoylake as the locals called it.
Yeah.
And it was cold. It was May. It was typical of what you would see. And it was so fun. And we, I don't know, Willie Wood and I we were friends. We were buddies. We were the first place team, and I guess the best part of this Walker Cup was Jay Sigel, our playing captain, put us out first in the first match, the alternate shot on Saturday morning. And we had practiced all week long. Willie was going to hit off the odd holes. I was going to hit off the evens. And, we were both really good short game players, and particularly good putter, Willie, for sure. And he was getting ready to hit his tee shot on the first hole. They announced, we were the first to play from the United States of America, first to play Willie Wood, and it was cold, it was windy, it was a big crowd, there was a very, very polite and long applause, and Willie got up over this tee shot and didn't look comfortable, stepped away, got up over it again, stepped away, came back to me, whispered in my ear, he goes, "I can't hit it, you have to hit it."
Oh, my gosh.
It was an oh my God moment. And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "I'm too nervous. You have to do it." And it was, throw away the playbook. I hadn't thought about that happening. I hadn't really practiced in my mind hitting a tee shot on this first hole.
Which is not an easy first hole. I can say, I mean, you know it better than I do, but I was there. I actually got to play the course the day after last year at the Walker Cup. And that first hole is, when you say a dogleg right, it is almost a straight right angle to the right, and everything on the right is OB.
Yeah, they have this small burn that can't even be 2 feet high.
Right.
And it's got a little, what would you call it on the top of it? A little.
It's almost just like this railing or like a speed bump that just runs the whole way down.
Big speed bump with some kind of scooped out something on the top of it, and you're like, this is out of bounds. And it would be easy to hit a great drive that went out of bounds, and to compound it, the pressure of being the first group, the pressure of playing Walker Cup, the pressure of having a partner, the pressure of playing when your partner says, "I can't do it," and then now the silence and the whispers and having to pull the driver, the head cover, and get a ball, all that, the extra time. I remember, and the wind blowing left to right, and I was cutting it at the time.
Oh,
I remember this was an awful moment. I don't know if you remember, on the left side there was, there's some buildings over there at the clubhouse, and there was a big clock.
Yeah.
And I think I was aiming at the clock. I was aiming so far left, and I aimed left, and I cut it, and it still ended up in the left rough. That's how far I was aiming. But we won the first 5 holes of a match. I think we were 4 or 5 under for those 5 holes. I'm thinking, this is going to be a piece of cake.
Yeah.
And, you're up 5.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, then we lost the next 4 holes. So we played the first 9 without having a half hole.
Match. Well, you guys won the match 3-1, but see, I kind of knew that story where, and when you said, like, Willie and I are friends, I was going to jump in and say, are you still friends after what he pulled, after he kind of left you hanging out to dry? I didn't know he actually teed it up and stood over it twice. I didn't know that story, because that's really awkward.
It was really awkward, and Willie is one of my longtime and close friends, and he thinks I kind of fudge in the story a little too much, and maybe exaggerate just a little bit, but it makes the story just a little bit better.
Yeah, we don't need all facts. I don't need all facts here. I mean, there's no fact checker. It's fine.
But it's close to true enough, let me tell you.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, but yeah, and I just looking at that team. So, most intimidating guy on your team, that '83 Walker Cup team, as a young guy coming in. I know that Crosby was younger, and you got a bunch of. But who is the guy on that team that you're like, man, I don't want to let this guy. I don't want to let this guy down.
Yeah, it was definitely Jay Siegel.
Okay.
He had an impeccable amateur record, and he also played a lot at Wannamoisett Country Club in the Northeast Amateur, which was close to where I grew up. A tournament I always wanted to get into. One of the first tournaments I ever went and watched as just a spectator. And I think Siegel, amateur golf then, there were more career amateurs that followed in, say, the footsteps of Bobby Jones. And Siegel was a man that had done well off the golf course professionally, in insurance business, and really went to the office. Wasn't somebody that, I all due respect to Stuart Hagestad, but I still think he's more like a professional amateur.
He will enjoy hearing that, because he listens to this podcast, so I will leave that in the episode. So, Stu, you heard that. Yep. You heard what Faxon just said about you.
Yeah, I'll be expecting a phone call. But he, so Siegel was also a guy that he received an honorary membership from Wannamoisett, which was a club back then that didn't do stuff like that very often. And for me to see someone like that receive an honorary membership, I'm like, boy, is that cool.
Yeah.
would be neat to be in that category where you have that much respect from someone. So I thought that was something. And when one of my highlights as an amateur was I won the Sunnyhammock Amateur Championship in, I'm going to say 1982, and it had to be 82 because I turned pro in the summer of 83. So
it was 82. You are correct in Brad Faxon history and Brad Faxon trivia. You are correct, sir. Okay,
so I was playing that final round with Siegel, and he was a Pennsylvania guy. We were in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and he would have been the most well-known guy. Nobody knew who I was from Rhode Island, and I remember on one of the holes, I was standing to the side of the tee. He was getting ready to hit his tee shot. And I must have distracted him, and he stepped away, and he goes, "Hey, can you move over a little bit?" And he said it very nicely, but it was one of those that it was intimidating, because I think back then I would have just let myself stay distracted and made a swing and probably hit a crappy shot and not blamed it on anybody but myself. But when he asked me to move out of the way, and that intimidated me. I don't know why, but it just kind of bugged me. And, he was probably 15, 20 years older than I was. I'm guessing that's probably right.
About 40 years old, something like that. And you're like,
yeah. So I was like, oh man.
It is kind of also interesting how a 40-year-old is a playing captain. I mean, think about that. Right now, the trend is for the captains of the Walker Cup team to be. It looks like it's more of an honorary thing from past accomplishments. A lot of guys in their 60s and maybe late 50s, but that's just a very unique thing in and of itself.
Well, and I think how that's transpired really is because if you think about it, nowadays everybody turns professional.
Right.
There's very few Buddy Marucci's and Nathaniel Crosby's left, and these captains like Spider Miller, they get that captaincy now for 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's very different world as we know it in the game, where players now, the best players in the world are all college players, the best amateur golfers. And the U.S. Amateur, we didn't want, back then there was no such thing as the U.S. Mid-Amateur. We didn't have that event.
Yeah, that was 81.
And that's kind of sprung from, the game changing, the college players becoming more dominant. And really, it would, if you went back, it would probably be from right around then is when the AJGA started, where there was more of a tournament schedule for junior golfers. So they were playing as much golf as a tour player, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. You turn pro, you get onto the tour, and you were in that era where, Q School was still a thing, that you played and it got you a ticket to the PGA Tour. And you went to Q School one time in 83, right after Walker Cup. And of all places, it's at TPC Sawgrass, which I still think is just so hysterical that this is a golf course that is going to determine your livelihood, and it has has just all these pitfalls of this die design that's just got to be absolutely brutal. You get through, Pavin gets through, Mark Brooks, Sindelar, a lot of these guys that were the stars of the 80s and the 90s. Do you remember any sort of a 17th hole heartbreak at that Q School?
Well, yes, but not for me.
Right. No, I know you got through. I think you got through. I mean, I know you had the issue where that fifth round was wiped out because of rain, but you had that great sixth round. I think you shot like 70 or 71. So I know you got through pretty comfortably. I don't have it in front of me exactly where you were, but I know you weren't on the line.
Yeah, I don't know if I was ever comfortable at any shot the entire week, and especially there where it was relatively new course. The course has been softened, by removal of some of the huge slopes in the greens, the tree on 18, the famous tree that hung over the middle of the fairway on 18, which was the hardest hole I'd ever seen to that point, and then the paranoia coming to 17. So I played with Paul Azinger. I believe it was the cut round, because it was a 4-round cut. He made a quadruple bogey 7 playing with me, and to watch balls go in the water. And I believe even back then that the 17th hole was red-lined lateral hazard, which was a word we could use back then when the rules were different. But
Right.
if you had hit it over the back of the green, you got to drop it on the green and putt for a par anyway.
Right.
And I think I remember Azinger missing short one ball and wide the other, which was a tragic mistake to make.
Right. Okay, interesting.
Yep, and that was something I saw, and that you mentioned it earlier. One of the rounds we played, we had some bad weather, and I finished with I believe it was the fourth round. I shot 71 and moved way up. I was moving way up because it was a windy, wet, cold, damp sort of day, and they canceled that round, and then subsequently canceled all the scores that were completed from that day because they had such a big field. They needed to get everybody back on the course and start them on different tees, and I'm like, no way. So I think I went back out and shot 75 or 76 that fourth round, and I made the cut, but it was a little bit of a struggle, and it knocked me back into the top 50 guys made it back then, and I think it put me into the high 30s or low 40s where I needed to play well on the weekend. And when you go play Pete Dye's courses in stroke play,
for a living,
yeah, they're well, right, and it's not like you're playing Stableford,
right?
You don't have that ability to play a mulligan with your buddies. Every hole, it seemed like every hole at Sawgrass had the potential, even the shorter holes, to make a double bogey because there was water everywhere.
I'm just thinking that 17th hole. If I'm well inside the cut line and that back of that green's playing as a lateral, man, I would just hit a 5-iron or just blast a 5-iron over it. I would not even get close. I just make sure it covers ground so I can drop it on that island and just 2-putt for my bogey. And thank you very much.
Yeah, and make sure you get a club that's going to fly to the back of the green. If you're lucky enough that it landed on the green and rolled over, you still had a putt for a par.
Even if I don't land it, I just want to be able to have everyone in my group see that the ball crossed the land.
Yep, and you just had to be careful that you didn't hit a little too solid or it went to the land on the other side of that pond.
Oh, that's true. Okay, forgot about that. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's probably about 25 yards between the back edge of the green and where the spectators would sit during the Players' Championship. And that would have been, oh, man, I can't imagine what that would have felt like if you did that.
Yeah,
but
that would be bad. Wow.
Definitely would have been bad.
Yes.
But I had a caddy at the qualifying school. His name was Joe Grillo. Gypsy John Michael Grillo was his nickname.
Okay.
And Gypsy caddied for years for Jim Simons, and I had met him when I played at Pleasant Valley, one of the local tournaments to New England, a PGA Tour event. I played with Jim Simons. I was still an amateur, and I met Gypsy. I was playing with Ray Floyd and Jim Simons, which was a kind of a intimidating pairing. And Gypsy was really nice to me, and I had asked him if he would go through the Q school with me. And back then, really, there was no such thing as good nutrition on the golf course. You kind of ate what you wanted to eat. And at the turn, every time they had like a little snack laid out for the players, and they had these kind of butter biscuits called Lorna Doone. I don't know if you're old enough to know what Lorna Doone was, but they were just kind of bland white crackers. They had a lot of sugar in them, and then they had milk, and we would have cookies and milk at the turn. And every round, I bogeyed the 10th hole after my milk and cookies.
Of course.
And yeah. So finally, on the final day, on the 6th round, we got to the turn, and he's standing, he's blocking me. He says, "You're not having the cookie. You're not going to do this." And I think that final round, I shot 1 under par 71, maybe with 2 birdies and 1 bogey, and one of the finest rounds I'd ever played in my life. And I have a buddy of mine that made it through that qualifying named Jim Roy. His son Kevin is on the Korn Ferry Tour now. And we remember, starting that week out playing practice rounds together. Everybody's talking to each other. Everybody's happy. And then once that first round started, it was like heads down. Nobody smiled. Nobody talked to each other. It was amazing.
It's so brutal. I wish they would bring it back in some way. I don't know how they would do it. I know that now there's Q School just takes you to the Korn Ferry Tour, but it would be so great to have just something where these guys can come in and it's for your card. And
no kidding. That that week, and this people like watching the Q School. Watching it on TV, watching these. A lot of times you'd have veterans that had played the tour that had an off year. You'd see some young stars that had to go through it, that even though they had college careers, still had to get their card. But there was a chance, that chase for stardom, that here you go, here's your card, and now you very rarely see a guy that seems like a good college player get straight to the tour. Well, I can make the exception this year. We had an extraordinary amount of them with Matt Wolff and Morikawa and Doc Redman. But that's such an exception.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And I mean, gosh, just the drama itself, because it seems like, when you watch golf on TV, and sometimes that's what's missing. You just don't see that it means. I mean, I know there's a lot of money out there, and I know that there's points, there's FedEx Cup points, there's all that out there. But man, I'd love to see these guys just competing, knowing that this is for a job. This is just for livelihood, and you got to do it this week, or else wait till next year.
It was the ultimate of pressure. I still think in my golfing career, I don't remember as being as nervous as I was that week, and maybe the best shot I can remember hitting in those, it was 90 holes, because I played 18 holes.
Yeah.
It didn't count. I got up on the 18th hole, the final round, and I had parred 17, and I knew I could make a 5, 6, or 7. I could probably make a 7 on the 18th hole and still, keep my card. I was in 11th, 12th, 13th place, something like that.
Yeah.
And I ripped a draw with my driver down the middle, back in the day with a Woodland club, where that hole wasn't playing very short no matter what the wind was doing. And I remember hitting a draw, aiming at that trunk of that tree and just trying to draw it. And it was one of those, as soon as it left the face, you picked up the tee because you knew you didn't have to watch it anymore.
Yep.
Well, it wasn't like you get many of those swings at that course.
That's awesome. So you get on tour, and this fantastic career, multiple wins, and I guess the one thing I really wanted to ask is, when I think of guys that are friends on tour, or names that kind of fit together, it's you and Billy Andrade, and I'm wondering how much having a close friend that grew up in the same area, how much that helped your career, as opposed to just like, I see this guy at this tournament stop and at that tournament stop, and we'll play a practice round together here and there and go to dinner. But how much did it maybe help your career knowing you had a very close friend from the same area that you kind of grew up around to go through the same experiences with?
It's really remarkable. It's unique because Rhode Island's such a small state, and to have not only two players, Billy and myself, but
Quigley. You had Quigley too.
And Dana Quigley. And then we had a few other players like Pat Horgan and Pat Sheehan, Jimmy Hallett, some guys that got out on the tour and played some pretty decent golf. But I think what with Billy and I, because we were from two towns apart, I was in Barrington, Billy was in Bristol, but he was 3 years younger than I am.
Yeah.
And I was going to a Barrington public school. He was going to a kind of a private school called Providence Country Day in Providence. So that 3 years difference was a bigger difference back then when you were a kid. And because I was older, I had played better golf at an earlier age. When I was 14, I won the state juniors. Billy was only 11. And then as I got older, he was starting to get more competitive. And we didn't hang around together because you didn't do that when you were 3 years apart at 15 years old. But we saw each other a lot. And then as we started traveling the amateur game, and he got better as a junior very quickly. And I think him seeing me play well, and it's similar to me seeing Dana Quigley play well, it helped our confidence, each of our confidence. And then I went off to college, and he showed up at Wake Forest on an Arnold Palmer scholarship. I was at Furman, and I had started playing well then. But as I said, mine was more of a gradual ascent. His was kind of a dynamic. It went more stealth right up. Like holy smokes, he won national junior tournaments and played a lot around the country, played better than I did, was highly ranked, and then went to a better college. So it really wasn't like we were hanging out a lot until our amateur days. We would try and travel a little bit together, playing our college days, playing some amateur golf together. And then I got out on the tour. His college career blossomed, and then I think he missed his card his first year, played some more internationally. And then what's funny is, we were both kind of learning the ropes, playing the tour in the mid-'80s, the early '90s, and he won before I did, and he won 2 tournaments in a row in 1991. He won the Kemper Open in, down in D.C., and then he won at Westchester. And I was like, man, how can this guy win and me, I can't win, and I know I'm as good as him. We've been playing together for this long, and I ended up winning later that summer. And he was playing in the Buick Open in Flint, Michigan, and he and his wife were driving out of the course and listening on radio going to the airport, and they heard that I was in a playoff with Chip Beck, and they turned around hoping that I'd win the playoff because they wanted to come,
to
celebrate,
yeah.
congratulate me. Yeah, and, risk missing their flight and risk maybe that I wouldn't win the playoff. And thankfully I won the playoff in the first extra hole. They came back and we hung out and spent a little time together, and then they raced back to the airport and made their flight. But I think Billy's win, really spurred me on to kind of, I think, really to kick my own butt and get my act together. And
interesting.
That really helped to have that. And for Rhode Islanders, that was a great story to have the two of us win in similar years. And I started playing much better golf. That was kind of the kickoff for what I would have said the best part of my career. The early '90s, '91 through maybe 2005 is when I played my best golf.
You mentioned, one of the best shots you hit was in Q School, and then, some of the best rounds you played, obviously getting onto the PGA Tour. But I'm guessing the best round of your life, if you had to pick, I'm assuming the 63 and the 95 PGA at Riviera has to be right up there.
No doubt. I think that the best thing a golfer could do is play an important round well under pressure when they know they have to do it.
Right.
And that was the final event for the PGA at Riviera. It was the final event for the qualifying points for the Ryder Cup. And there had never been a player selected to make a Ryder Cup team prior to that hadn't played Ryder Cup before.
Right. So
I knew that if I didn't qualify, I wasn't going to get picked by Lanny Wadkins, the captain. And I would know, nothing against Lanny for that. It was just the way it was.
Yeah,
and all the captains,
rookie, yeah.
Right. And all the captains up to that time, I may be mistaken on this, but I think it was right, had been PGA champions, not just major champions.
You're right.
So Lanny had won the PGA championship, and, I was in 15th to 20th place starting that final round. I knew I had been playing well. I just hadn't made a lot of putts, and it was a tournament where the scores were low, the conditions were ideal, except for the conditions of the greens. They had been renovated by Cork Wrench, and the grass hadn't taken, but the weather was perfect. It was sunny, it was warm, it wasn't a tremendous amount of rough, and it was a packed leaderboard with LT Tendell's, Montgomery. It was a great field, and I got off to one of the most incredible starts you could ever ask for by eagling the par 5 first, and then seemed like birdie every hole. I birdied 3, 5, 6, 7. I missed a short putt for birdie on 8, like a 7 or 8 footer, and then birdied number 9 to shoot a 28. And I know that had been done once before, and you have to go back into the 20s. Be a good trivia question for the listeners to figure out who that other person is that shot 28. But I don't know if that record will ever be broken in a major championship. Do you think anybody will ever shoot 27?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a tough. I mean, you never say never. Look at Brandon Grace shot 62 in the British Open, so you get close to it. But you got to have ideal conditions. But when there's the lowest bars you're seeing are 35s, to shoot 27, that's 8 birdies out of 9 holes. That's pretty difficult in majors.
Yeah. No, I that round was, I mean, I remember that round. I'm not as well as you do, but I remember the fact that I remember watching the broadcast back in 95 where it was just like, this guy is doing this, he's probably not going to win. I mean, he got close, but he's probably not going to win, but he knows that if he top fives it, he's going to be on that Ryder Cup team. And yeah, and then you get on and you're a rookie on the Ryder Cup. This is Oak Hill. And obviously you're a rookie on that team. And, I actually, open it up to, you mentioned listeners. I opened it up to some questions to some listeners because I was saying, hey, I'm talking to a 2-time Ryder Cupper today. And what questions do you have? And a couple of them were, what was the most nerve-wracking, or what's more nerve-wracking for you? Your first tee shot at the Ryder Cup, or maybe your first tee shot playing in the Masters?
It was 100% the Ryder Cup, but for a different reason than you'd expect.
Okay.
We were, the Ryder Cup was at Oak Hill in Rochester in late September. And, cool mornings but ideal conditions and a great city to have the Ryder Cup. There was no real major sports there. So it was packed, and Oak Hill had great history. And both teams played Monday of tournament week. The tournament didn't start till Friday, playing practice rounds with no crowds. The crowds weren't let in until Tuesday. So we went around, and Monday night, Lanny says, hey, look, I'm going to put your group out first, Brad. It's going to be you, Corey Pavin, Peter Jacobson, and Lauren Robertson. And Peter and I were going to be a potential 4-ball partnership, and Lauren and Corey were going to be a potential foursomes partnership. So we get out to the practice tee that morning, and it's packed with spectators. And, they had ropes and, railings to be behind, but we couldn't believe how big the crowds were after having played the day before with nobody there. So when it was our turn to walk to the first tee for the 9 o'clock start, it was probably a 200-yard walk from the practice tee to the first tee, and there was like a gauntlet, and people dressed in red, white, and blue, holding American flags, shouting USA, and we had never seen that. And we're like, holy smokes,
this is
signing
real.
autographs, and it was exciting and very, we were appreciative, we were nervous, and we're like laughing, and arms are up in the air. And then we kind of turn this corner and walk up the steps to the first tee. And we get up there, and I was the first one on the tee. And standing there next to each other, waving American flags, were Byron Nelson and George Herbert Walker Bush.
Hello.
And I was like, oh, my. How often do you see that? Never. And how often do you see them waving flags? And they're like, come on, guys, represent your country well. And shaking our hands. And
oh, shit.
We're like, oh, my. And then, Bush was a couple years out of office then. And this voice of God just came over the loudspeaker and says, next to play, representing the United States of America, will you please give a big welcome for Brad Faxon? And I had no idea I was going to be the first guy to hit. And
how great would it be if Willie Wood was there and you can go, Willie, you're going to need to hit this for me?
No, I never even thought about that. But
damn.
What I was thinking about, which made it even more nerve-wracking, was we had a joke going on in the locker room that if anybody was playing poorly, they would become the man in the envelope. And golfers would probably know what that envelope means. But at the Ryder Cup, if in singles matches, if anybody on one team is hurt, the opposing captain has to put a player in the envelope who might not be playing the best or would actually be the worst player on the team that week.
Right.
And he would have to be that match would have to be considered a draw, and you wouldn't play that day if somebody got hurt. So you never wanted to be the man in the envelope.
Right.
And we had this sort of acronym for MITE, man in the envelope, MITE. Yeah. So all I was thinking, my thought over the ball was, if I don't hit a good shot here, I'm going to be the man on the envelope. I hope Lanny's not here because I don't want him to see this shot. And the first hole in Oak Hill was a long par 4, 440 yards. It was OB to the right. The wind was blowing to the right. It was kind of dewy and wet. First swing, will this thing draw? And I hit kind of a low hook that got in the air, and it looked like a pretty good shot to me. It ended up just in the left rough, and I thought, under the circumstances, the greatest shot ever hit in the history of the game.
There you go.
Yes. So we get down there, and everybody had, so we're kind of laughing at how nervous we all were. And then we get down to the fairway. All 4 balls are like in the fairway next to each other. They're like, within 5 yards. But Lanny Watkins kind of snuck out of the rough and comes over there, and 2 of us hit the fairway, probably Lauren and Peter, and maybe Corey and I in the rough or somebody else. And Lanny says, "Don't worry about that, guys. You won't hit it in the rough in the tournament." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, well, I always hit it in the rough." And so now he's standing there watching, and I had to take out a 3-iron back then, long hole, wet, downhill lie, creek 20 yards, 30 yards short of the green. I'm like, "Oh my God, Lanny's watching me hit a 3-iron off a downhill lie."
This is harder than the tee shot.
So that was as nervous as I think I'd ever been in the game, and we were whispering "might" to each other, and it just was.
Oh, that's
it was
great.
awful.
Well,
it was.
Well, the thing is that just to piggyback on what you're saying about the man in the envelope, that just happened 4 years previously because Steve Pate was in the envelope, and Steve Pate didn't play because he was in that limo accident on the way to a gala at the '91 Ryder Cup at Kiowa. So. It's
That's
not
exactly
like,
right.
And it's not like something that, like I said, it's not like something that nobody has in mind. That just happened. So that's funny that thing. So I wanted to throw another one. A buddy of mine, believe it or not, was on the U.S. Army golf team and was there at the Ryder Cup in '95. And I pinged him really quick. I said, "Hey, I'm talking to Mr. Faxon." I said, "What do you want me to talk to him about?" He's like, "Well, ask him if he remembers bringing the U.S. Army golf team into the clubhouse."
Yes. I don't remember which day it was.
I think he said it was either during opening ceremonies or something like that. I think he said it was around the opening ceremonies.
Yeah, so that would have been Thursday.
Yeah.
And the week was back then. This was before any of the players started to come vocal with, the PGA of America maybe taking advantage of. There were a few players that
charitable,
said
right,
paid or compensation or something like that, and I was of the opinion that I'd walk across the Atlantic Ocean to play in this. That wasn't there yet, but there were big nights. There were nights in front of the PGA of America. There were nights with black ties, with thousands of people in the room, one of the big galas, and then the big opening ceremonies. And it was a mental drain too, because we were trying to, get ready and prepare ourselves to play, not knowing what most of this stuff was like, going to a Ryder Cup.
PGA Tour players, I'm assuming you're creatures of habit. You travel the way you want to travel. You room where you want to room. You're with different people that like for example, you and Andre, I'm sure you guys traveled a lot together, but now you got, 11 other guys and you have this schedule that's being put in front of you. I'm sure there are guys that just were not handling that well because they're out of their comfort zone. Right.
Most players aren't eating with other players and other families, members. We had a big team room that had the chance for all 24 players and their wives or significant others and their, the PGA members. So back then there were the secretaries, the vice presidents. They were all welcomed into that room. They were all with their wives in it. So it was a little bit different than I thought it would be.
Right.
It wasn't just players. I think that team room has become much more just players now.
Yeah. What'd you do with all the gear you got, whether at 95 or 97 at Valderrama? Did you keep any of that stuff, or did that all go to charitable causes? Or
no, I actually kept a lot of it for a long time because the pants that we had were, very nice wool slack that, it was something you would have worn at other times with other coats. So I kept the pants. I gave the shirts to my dad and some of my friends because they weren't with the same company that I was using, but the slacks were Hickey Freeman or Corbin, and back then that was as expensive a pair of pants as I had.
Nice.
And yeah, and the shirts had logos. I still have a few of the hats, and they were those big, retro hat now.
Yeah.
Big brim, straight hat that it seems like all the young guys look cool in now. It had your name on the back of the hat.
Yeah.
It had the logo from the Ryder Cup team. I thought they were cool.
Yeah.
And now I think that, so many players have equipment and apparel contracts that a lot of them don't keep the team stuff anymore, but they certainly have kept over the past some of the nicer sports coats and stuff like that if it doesn't have a lot of logoing on it.
You mentioning your equipment or clothing companies, and I think obviously PGA Tour players have such a strong tie to their brands, and I guess when I think of players with really strong ties, if I saw Jordan Spieth wearing something other than Under Armour, it would look off, and especially Tiger wearing something other than Nike. I don't think there's a picture of you that exists without you wearing a Titleist visor or a hat on it. When did your relationship with Titleist begin?
1973, when I was 12 years old.
Okay. Maybe something a little more official than that, but I understand what you're saying. But
I grew up in, like I said, in Barrington, Rhode Island. The headquarters for Titleist were
right down the street
in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, a half an hour away. So our town and our club were, a haven for the, kind of the C-suite level Titleist execs, and a lot of them lived in their town. If they had kids, we had a good school system, and it wasn't a bad drive to the offices. So everybody, including the golf professionals at the club, were Titleist staff. I don't think they sold another brand in the pro shop, and maybe they still don't. And in the history at Rhode Island Country Club, 100 plus years old, there's only been 4 golf professionals there. So I learned a lot about loyalty as a 12, 13-year-old when I was down the range plucking golf balls that were Titleist, seeing a Titleist-filled pro shop. And one of the first guys that was vice chair of the company, a guy named Ed Abrain, who was in the golf business for seemingly forever, he handed me a sleeve of a prototype Titleist DT.
Oh yeah.
And I was 15 and starting to be a pretty good player, maybe 14 or 15 when I got this white box. And when you were a kid and you got new golf balls, that was a treat.
Oh yeah.
If you were playing high school golf back in Barrington, Rhode Island when I was a kid, you'd get a sleeve of balls for the day, and after you played with them, the coach would take them back and use them again the next week.
Oh.
So yeah. So we didn't have big budgets. So when I got this sleeve from Eddie Abrain, he says, "Hey, I want you to practice with this ball and tell me what you think. How does it feel? Give me some feedback." And I went out by myself one of those days, carrying my own bag, playing. And I'm going to try out this Titleist DT. I was so excited. In the second hole, I topped my drive. I had a Walter Hagen Persimmon driver that I had just gotten, and I topped it into this creek on the second hole.
Oh, no.
This brand new DT, and nobody was around to see it. I was in tears looking for this ball, and it was a kind of a muddy creek. You never would have found this ball. I spent an hour and a half looking for it, never found it. Ended up playing, 6 holes that day using the DTs and a couple other balls, and I got to see the exec the next week. He goes, "How do you like those DTs?" I go, "They were great." He goes, "I'd like to get them back from you."
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Oh, no. I said, "Oh, can I use them a little bit longer? I want to give you some more feedback."
Yeah.
And he let me keep them. But that was very embarrassing.
Oh, wow. I know a guy that you have a great relationship with, comes to Titleist in 95. We could probably fill up an entire episode about the most famous putters in history, whether it's the old Acushnet Bullseyes or the Wilson 8802 Ping Anser. And, but, you could probably make an argument that the Cameron, Scotty Cameron's empire, so to speak, is at the top of that list. Do you remember when the light bulb went off for him, or even for you, that okay, this is not just going to be a simple putter. This is going to turn into something that's really just going to take over, I guess, the way putters are looked at in the industry.
It kind of evolved in between 95 and 97. Wally Uline, who was the head of the company back then, had a vision unlike anybody else to come at equipment. The golf ball was the moneymaker in the brand, but he also knew that he wanted to capture with names like Cameron or Scotty, as he's known, or Vokey, and that this would be an important part to building the brand of Titleist and to build the best, equipment category. So obviously putters was a big part of that. Wedges became a big part of that afterwards. And now if you look at Titleist, they're leading the tour in woods and irons and hybrids and just fairway metal clubs. So when Scotty got there, I think one of the first things that happened was he had his own putter studio, and it was kind of in a kind of a nice garage. But Scotty had been making putters for Mizuno, and he had made putters on his own, and kind of the style of a TP Mills where they were custom made, the gunmetal. And he was also a great imitator. And the patent rights, I didn't know this, the patent rights for the models of putters expired after, I believe, 17 years. So if you were a maker of putters, you could, try and copy or imitate the great brands. And everybody knows the Ping Answer was the most popular putter, and a lot of those heel-toe weighted putters that were replacing the blades were becoming the style. And Scotty did a good job immediately trying to take some of the players that were on the Titleist staff that had used other putters, and mine in particular was the Ping My Day,
right?
Which was the Zing head with the Answer hosel. And I said to him, Scotty, it's going to be hard for me to change this putter, but let's see what we can do. How close can we come to making something that looks like what I use? And he was using a different material. He was using a milled stainless steel compared to Titleist. He used different metals. He had beryllium, he had copper, he had bronze, all in this putters. So the sound was different. The shafts were different. The process was different. But he was very patient, and he understood. I think we were both learning, that he wanted to hear comments and feedback from the players. And I think that's what Titleist has done so well, is they've always allowed their players to become part of their R&D team with whatever equipment it was. And it was the first time I had seen slow motion capture of my stroke, what the ball does when it leaves the face, and how that can change with lies, lofts, heads, and shafts. So, I became a student again while I was trying to have someone make me a putter that would be as good as the one that I was using.
Right.
And feel like, and look like, and sound like. So it took about a year and a half for me to get a putter, and I still have. It's kind of cool to see him. The first prototype he ever made to me, and then the second prototype, and then the backup putters, and then he made a replica inspired by putter that sold out. So I give Scotty as much credit for my improvement in my putting as anybody in the world, because I hadn't seen my stroke in slow motion until 1995 or 6. And when I saw that, I adjusted my stroke. And at that time, I was 34 years old, 35 years old, and, well into my prime of my career.
Yeah.
And I improved my putting. I became, if you looked at statistics in those years, I went from being a very, very good putter to like one of the best over a long stretch as I got older. And I think that's encouraging to players as they get out on the tour and try and get better, as you can get better as you get older. Where we've always thought this game is, it's a game of nerves.
Yeah, nerves get frayed and you lose it and you
Yeah.
can't get it back. And,
I proved that that concept wasn't necessarily true.
Yeah. I spoke on a previous episode to Ryan Chrysler, who, he's at the Floridian now teaching there, but he was in Austin, Texas, and he spent a lot of time around Crenshaw. And he said the majority of his practice time was on the putting green. And, I guess if you take a step back, you're like, okay, of course that makes sense. He's one of the most graceful putters of all time, but I'm guessing people would think that Ben Crenshaw just rolls out of bed and that putting stroke is just waiting for him. And you have a very similar reputation as one of the best putters of all time, and I'm assuming that people think that about you as well, that stroke's just there just whenever you need it. And I guess for the casual golf fan, during the prime of your career, that 34, 35, that the 80s to the early 2000s, what were your practice sessions like on the putting green? How did you work at keeping that stroke?
Well, like many different parts of the game over the years, and that was 25 years ago. Things have changed so much with technology. Putting gadgets, putting devices, putting technologies have all changed. So we had the most complicated, putting aid that we had was maybe a chalk line to putt on, and or feels or tips, and there were a lot more players having putting contests, and there was not as many players looking at video of your stroke, and we played more games, and we could hit. I remember standing in one spot trying to hit 100 3-foot putts in a row, or trying to hit 100 putts around the clock. Like, remember seeing Phil Mickelson do that with Dave Pell.
Yeah.
So there wasn't the myriad of devices like you see players out there with gates and strings and tees to hit balls through.
Mirrors
the mirrors, and all those things help with working on particular fundamentals. But as I've become and morphed into a little bit of a putting coach, I would say I think those things are good, and they're good to a point. But you've got to learn. Like I'm a big believer, and I've told Scotty this. I said you're doing all your filming inside on a perfect surface indoors where there's no elements. I want to see my players outdoors. I want to see them on the green. I want to see them with wind and shadows and grains, and see how they do then, because that's where it is on the course. And I think there's you have your different types of practices that you'll do, but the thing I think I've been helping players with the most is how to take how they practice to the golf course, and how to think when you're on the course, rather than becoming a technical robot, which sometimes seems to hurt players where they lose their touches and their feels.
Yeah, I'm going to have to stop you there. If you say you're somewhat of a putting coach and you're working with Rory McIlroy and Gary Woodland, I think we're going to have to call bullshit on that, Brad, and say you are indeed a renowned putting coach at this point. So how do you I know that there's a great story about how when you first started working with Rory, you asked him to hit some putts with a sand wedge and with a 5-wood, and I guess just the purpose of that was to kind of get out of his own head and just develop more feel. Is that kind of the purpose of what that drill was for?
Yeah, and I've done that with a lot of players. And look, I haven't invented anything that I'm doing myself. I've been around a lot of good players and a lot of good instructors and asked a lot of questions for a long time. But if I've become this kind of teacher, look, all these teachers, they come and they go. You've seen Stan Utley become very popular, and then he faded away. Not because he lost his ability to teach, but just everybody kind of comes and goes. And Dave Stockton was the guy, Pels was the guy, and I'm sure at some point I'll be the guy they used to go see. But I haven't talked to a player that's come to see me that says, you know what, I need more to think about. I need more time over the ball, and I putt better in tournaments than I do when I'm just messing around at home. Nobody ever says that.
Yeah.
So it's really, how do you get players to practice better in competition? And I think that's where I've had my success, because I did it, and I got better as I got older. And I think I was in tune to what other players talked about and thought about. So, when Rory was struggling with his putter, he was thinking a lot about his technique and his stroke, and his technique had probably improved, but he wasn't allowing that technique to work. And he was, I watched him as he set up over a putt, trying to, like he had the mirror in front of him while he was putting, like he was checking out alignment and face alignment and how his feet and how his hips and his legs looked. And I believe that I believe in the player way more than I believe in any technique, right? I think these top players are so good that a lot of times they don't get enough credit for that. So it's really so individualistic too, how you talk to a person. And I've had other players that really their strokes haven't been as good, and there's been more technical changes. And if you talk to a Brandon Grace, who had a lot of strange things going on in his stroke, he would admit it. He held on to it in a funny way. He had horrible putting stats, and he went out, and I think I'm as proud of the work I've done with Brandon and he's worked as hard as anybody at changing stuff in his stroke and his routine. And he won the South African Open after a lull of about a year. So that feels pretty good. And, so now I have more people calling. I have less time to do this stuff than I like, but I always love talking to the best players in the world in their position, with their club, whether it was Payne Stewart with a long iron or Greg Norman with a driver or Ben Crenshaw with a putter.
Right.
Jack Nicklaus or Tom Watson hitting a high ball. I always ask these guys questions. I was probably pestered them to I wish this kid would get the heck out of here,
Yeah, well, but you have to do that to learn from the best. You got to surround yourself. You got to surround yourself with the best. I want to get you out of here, but I just want to ask you a couple of things before we get to a really quick segment at the end. I cannot let you off the phone without asking you about the Fred Meyer Challenge. Now, some people may know what this is, but this was a two-man event that was in Portland area that Peter Jacobsen started. And this was one of the very rare events where the PGA Tour players would get together and play this two-man event. All the stars were there. Nicklaus and Palmer and Player and Trevino and just all these guys were there. I mean, even John Daly was there and Payne Stewart. Everyone was there. And you won it, I believe, 5 times, 3 times with Norman, nice pick, and 2 times, I think, with Andred. And this seemed like so much fun for a PGA Tour player. I mean, that seemed like going away to camp almost.
Right. Well, first of all, Peter Jacobsen came up with this idea. I mean, a guy with unbelievable spirit and creativity, from his hometown, had a big grocery store. They had a lot of customers. Peter was close to Arnold, so you get Arnold anywhere, especially back then when we were playing the early 90s. That made it popular. Team events made it popular. And I got paired early on. I might have played with Rick Fair the first year. He was a good player from Seattle, and it was a Walker Cup teammate of mine. And then I got paired with Norman. And Norman was a catch for Peter, and I had become friendly with Greg because I was starting to play some golf in Australia, and Greg kind of helped me to get in a couple of the events down there. We had lived in Orlando together, and then started playing some practice rounds. So I think I kind of helped get Greg to go there, and then we won the event. And Greg probably didn't want to come back and do that stuff because he didn't do that stuff, and he was number 1 in the world. And then we won again.
Got to come back and defend.
Yeah, so which I liked. And then I remember it was one of the first times I'd flown private in my life, and Greg had his own plane, and his pilot went over Mount Hood, and we were just, it was so fun. And then Greg was an intimidating guy to play with, and I remember when he didn't really talk to me a lot about what I should be doing strategy-wise on the course until the second round, the first year, and we were close to the lead. And the 16th hole maybe the 17th hole was a par 5, very reachable, a dogleg to the right, and the flagstick was tucked left where there's a little creek. And we had both driven it nicely. I was the first guy to hit, and I had a 4 or 5 iron out. And I like to draw the ball, and I was going to hit this at the middle of the green and hopefully let it draw towards the flag. And Greg walks over to me. He goes, "Hey, what are you thinking here?" And I was literally in my routine.
Oh, God.
And he hadn't said anything like this to me. And I go, "What am I thinking here?" I'm like, "Well, I'm thinking I'm going to aim this at the middle of the green and draw it." He goes, "Well, make sure you keep it out to the right so I can go with the flag." It was the first time he'd really ever said anything.
Right.
And I pushed this thing so hard to the right. It was in the bushes. And he went at the green anyway, at the flagstick anyway, and pulled to hit the rocks. And, I think we struggled and somehow made a par on a hole that everybody was making a 3 or a 4 on.
Right.
And somehow I made a long putt on the 18th hole to get us in the playoff and birdied the playoff hole. So Greg intimidated the shit out of me. And I still remember that. And then, a little redemption by making a long putt, but it was fun. And we won it twice. And then I guess maybe the greatest thing was, Billy and I had our great stretch, and Arnold had been very nice to both Billy and I, especially since Billy went to Wake Forest on the Arnold Palmer Scholarship. And Arnold asked us one year if we wanted to fly back with him to Latrobe, and when he was going to make us dinner, we'd stay at his house. It's just like the greatest thrill of our lifetime. And we won the tournament, so we had to go to the press room. We were the last ones to the airport. Arnold had his plane. He was waiting. You never make the guy that owns the plane wait. And here we are showing up. He has hands on hips as we drive in with his stern look on his face. I am so nervous. And he gets out and he goes, "You're making me wait." And then he kind of laughed and he goes, "Congratulations, way to go." And we were like, we couldn't even breathe. So we're so excited. We're in the first citation 10 ever made. Its tail number was AP1.
Of course.
And we take off. Arnold's in the left chair. And we get up there, and something wasn't right in the cockpit. There was a little bit of conversation, and I think Doc Giffen who was his press guy, was there in the plane with us, and we're like, something's going on. And Arnold comes back, and he says, "Hey, there's a light on. There was a warning light that there was something going on with our landing gear, and we're not sure it's in the right position. We got to take a detour to Wichita," which was the home of Citation Jet or Cessna Jet. And we're like, "Oh, no." So we get there. We had to land, and the head of Cessna Aviation was Russ Meyer, who was another Augusta National member and friends with Arnold. And red carpet rolls out. We get off the plane. They go get the mechanic, gets out there, and this is one of those things that we thought would be maybe a light bulb needed to be put in. And I see Arnold shaking his head, and Arnold walked over to me and Billy. He goes, "Do you guys like vodka?" And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "We're stuck here overnight, fellas. Sorry."
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't a vodka drinker. I would have a beer, and I think that he had a big deal with Kettle One.
Right.
And I think that was the first vodka I ever had in my life. And we stayed in some Holiday Inn in Wichita, Kansas, instead of in Latrobe.
Oh my gosh!
And Billy and I got up, and the next morning from Wichita, and they flew us to. I think they flew us to Winston-Salem because they had a private plane going there, and they said, "You can make your way home from here." Instead of staying with Winnie and getting to be the whole night with Arnold, we ended up in Winston-Salem.
I wish I would have seen the look on the guy's face at the Holiday Inn front desk if you two guys rolled in with Arnold Palmer.
With Arnold Palmer, yeah.
Oh, what a great story. All right, well, I'll get you out of here. You are a traditionalist. It's well known. I thought I'd ask you these questions to see if I can get any sort of reaction. Have you ever played a round of golf with a long putter?
A round of golf?
With a long putter.
That's the dumbest question ever asked. No.
Okay. All right. No, I got some more dumb ones. Hold on.
I've hit a putt with a long putter, but never played a round of golf.
Yeah, couldn't do it. Okay. So, yellow golf ball, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Cross-handed. You ever gone cross-handed at all in your life?
On a practice green.
Okay. Music in the golf cart in a casual round.
Almost 100% of the time now.
Okay. Really? Okay. And
and actually, I would even go back far. One of the guys I used to practice with a lot in the early 90s when I lived in Orlando, late 80s, early 90s, was Payne Stewart. And he used to have one of those traditional boom boxes. And he would take it out to the range, and we would hit balls to music. And boy, do I think that's a good thing for players' golf games.
Interesting. Okay. Interesting. Finally, do you consider yourself, this is just a wrap up, I'm curious about this, do you consider yourself an overachiever or an underachiever?
I think that I've been asked that, and I've asked players that question. I think you'd always want to think of yourself as an underachiever and have people tell you you're an overachiever.
Right.
But I think, as you get older and have more experience, maybe your raw skill goes away a little bit. I wish that I had the mental capabilities at 22 to 30 that I had from 35 to 40. And, Jack used to say that, I'm a smarter player now. And you'd go, well, what does that mean? And Tiger's doing that now. So, you have more experience to fall back on. So I would say I was probably a little bit of an underachiever, but if you called me an overachiever, I think that's a compliment too.
There you go. Well, Brad, I greatly appreciate this. It was a lot of fun. I know we left a lot on the table, and hopefully we can do it again sometime. Stay safe and stay, social distancing and all that fun stuff, and hopefully we'll all be back on the golf course as soon as possible. So thanks for joining me here at the Back of the Range.
Ben, great talking to you. I love listening to you, and certainly I'll think about you every time I'm on the back of the range.
And there you have it. Special thanks to Brad Faxon for joining me on this episode. Don't forget, every single episode is available at thebackoftherange.com. We'll see you tomorrow for another episode here at the Back of the Range.